Welcome, everybody, to our Credo presentation this morning. I am happy to be with you and letting you know that we'll have our May and June Credo presentations, but we will take off in July and we'll start again in August. So just letting you know. Thank you for coming to this one's a little bit different because of candidating week. We had to do a week early and I appreciate that people are here. So our speaker today is Dave Warren, who officially joined UUCC in November of 22, though he and his wife Jennefer had been longtime visitors prior to signing the book. He has attended UU services off and on for almost 40 years in Virginia, California, Arizona, and North Carolina. Dave volunteers at UUCC as an usher and a coffee service provider and is a member of the Ministerial search team and Intersectional justice team. In the greater community, he's volunteered as a court-appointed advocate for children in foster care and a peer addiction counselor, such important work. Growing up Catholic and in a relatively conservative culture, Dave is going to share with us his life journey by highlighting a handful of rethinking processes that have brought him to the work of this congregation. Please welcome Dave Warren.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm grateful to be able to share a little bit of myself with you today. Our lives, our spiritual journeys, they have multiple narratives and multiple ways we can tell our stories. If I was interviewing for a job, I'd be sharing the timeline of places I've worked and what I did there. If this was a 12-step meeting, I'd share that I started drinking at age 14 and stopped and started and stopped and started until I last stopped over 32 years ago. If this was a music club, I'd share that the first time I bought an album with my own money was when I was in 4th grade, and it was the Jackson 5's greatest hits. And I have hundreds of vinyls and CDs that are now virtually technically obsolete. Given the discussion group that some of us at the UUCC have had recently around Adam Grant's book, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know, I've decided to share some rethinking processes that have changed my thoughts, my feelings, and my focus in my life. So my whole life, when people have asked me, where are you from? I've said, I don't really have a hometown. We moved a lot. Dad joined the Navy straight out of high school. Mom focused on her 3 kids, of which I was the oldest. When I was born, we lived in Washington, D.C. And when my father chose the University of Washington to be where the Navy was going to pay him to get an undergraduate degree, I didn't realize that that first cross-country move was going to be the first of many cross-country moves I would make, both as a kid, as an adult. I actually didn't go to the same school for more than 2 consecutive years until I was in college. So when I was growing up, our family was Catholic. And at church, I was an altar boy, then a lector, then a teenage Eucharistic lay minister. So I was about as active as you can be as a kid in the church at the time. But for me, it was mostly just Sundays and Wednesday night catechism classes. I had a very part-time relationship with God. When I was 15, I was going through some tough times. To be transparent, I had totaled my parents' car drunk driving before I even had a driver's license. At the time, my father was overseas and he was on a 6-month stint on an aircraft carrier. And as a way of trying to help me get my act together, my mom suggested that I go talk to a guy who had overcome some of his own life problems. So I said, okay. So on Monday, March 12th of 1979, a guy named Terry Allenbaugh picked me up from school. We went through a McDonald's drive-through, got some Cokes, and we drove to a beautiful place in Washington State called Deception Pass. Deception Pass is actually a bridge, bridging Whidbey Island where we lived with another island. So this guy brought me there and he just shared part of his life story. And it turns out that Terry was an evangelical Christian. So he was actually sharing his testimony with me. And religion, God, were not new concepts to me that he was sharing, except the idea of God being part of my everyday life was different. And the kicker was the idea of the Bible being like a manual of life that could answer all my questions and guide me in everything I do. That was different. So on that day, on March 12, 1979, I asked Jesus to be my Lord and Savior. And from then on, for the next couple of years, I had a Bible with me almost all the time, including at high school. From that day forward, my spirituality was a central part of it. A couple of years later, I graduated high school and I went to Mary Washington College in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I chose that school because it had a religious studies program, and I knew I wanted to be involved in some form of ministry. I had Christian friends and acquaintances who were concerned about me studying religion in a public school. They were worried that I might not be taught the right things. Well, from some people's perspectives, they were right. I did learn a lot of things I had not anticipated learning. And as a double major in religion and history, I learned a lot of things that changed my life. There was one day in particular. I don't remember the exact details of the professor's lecture, but I do know it was about the Bible. And I know I had an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach as I thought to myself, oh shit, this book is not exactly what I thought it was. As I continued to learn things like the canonization of the Bible, learned about soteriology, which is the study of salvation, how people are saved, I started rethinking some things and unlearning some things that definitely left me in a space of theological vertigo. When I graduated, though I was armed with an undergraduate degree, I had more questions than answers. And from then on, if I was going to go anywhere for a Sunday service, I would go to a place where it was okay to have more questions than answers about God and the world around us. I was going to go to Unitarian Universalist services. Another round of rethinking that changed my professional career, it came as I was making my second cross-country move as an adult. After college graduation, I moved to the San Francisco area, and I've been running pizza restaurants for 16 years out there. I'd enjoyed managing businesses with the financial scoreboards and sometimes awards. I enjoyed leading people. I owned my own restaurant, kind of like being the boss. However, after a while, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something more. I wanted to focus more on helping people. So I sold my restaurant. I moved to Charlotte, and I enrolled in a master's program with the intention of becoming a full-time counselor / therapist. However, at the last second before the program was about to start, I started getting nervous about money. Now, money's never been a big indicator, a big priority in my life, but my ex-wife at the time was in social work, and I was getting ready to join the same kind of arena, and I was really worried about money being tight. However, my ex-wife said, you don't have to be a full-time counselor to help people. I've watched you help many people in the restaurant industry. I thought about that, and I realized she was right. Helping people, being connected to people, is not a job title. It's a way of life. So I stayed in the restaurant industry, but with a renewed focus. I studied really hard and got a bunch of books on leadership, and I embraced a leadership model that centers on serving the people with whom you work and who work for you. Instead of focusing on what you want from your employees, you focus on how you can help each of them individually be successful. This kind of culture building is a model that I share with restaurant owners and managers today as I work as a franchise business consultant for a restaurant company. My current personal why, the reason I get up every day, is to guide people with connecting the dots in their lives so that they'll have a greater sense of fulfillment. A watershed moment for much of the world came as the spring and summer of 2020 initiated some rethinking on a scale that most of us had never experienced before. The pandemic forced us to think about countless things, ranging from how readily microorganisms are spread on a daily basis to how much we take for granted going to a nearby store to get toilet paper and actually having toilet paper on the shelves. I was living in Arizona at the time, and my job and my whole department was eliminated with my company's response to the pandemic. So instead of rushing into another job, I decided to take some time off and invest in myself. I basically engaged in a 10-month sabbatical. During that time, I studied on a full-time basis. Some of my studies focused on emotional intelligence, psychological safety, organizational culture. However, I also felt compelled to start looking into some of the stuff I had been seeing around me. There was plenty on television in response to the murder of George Floyd, including seeing banners about Black Lives Matter, which had been hanging at both of the two Phoenix area UU churches that I attended at times. As a white cisgender male who didn't even know the meaning of cisgender at that time, diving into books such as White Fragility, So You Want to Talk About Race, and How to Be an Anti-Racist provided loads of opportunity for rethinking cycles and plenty of oh shit moments. For me, learning and unlearning that ensued then, it's never complete. No intellectual boxes can be checked. This kind of work is messy. Mistakes will be made and owned, and the work is never ending. The last bit of rethinking that I'd like to share with you today revolves around this community. I originally moved to Charlotte in 2002. As had been my tendency, I didn't go to church regularly. I did show up once every month or two to take in a good UU sermon. I attended services here and at Piedmont UU, which is actually closer to where I've always lived in the Charlotte area. I'd sit in the back row, write down notes of inspiration. And there was lots of notes of inspiration from this guy, Jay Leach. He could preach. He also helped me make sense of my personal world as I had gradually gotten more and more culturally liberal. Well, my editing took out some senses. When I sat in the back, when I watched the services, I missed what I had as a teenager going to an evangelical youth group. I missed the feeling of belonging. I missed the feeling of being part of a group working towards good for other people. I really wanted that feeling again. However, you don't get that feeling by just sitting in the back row every now and then, listening, taking notes, and leaving. Though I came on some Sundays and I left intellectually stimulated, I never tried to connect with people here. Heck, I only took advantage of free coffee and snacks a couple times a year. I normally just made a beeline to my car. And that was for on and off for 16 years. Even when I finally wrote an introductory letter to Reverend Jay and Kelly Green in March of 2015, they each graciously wrote back to me within 24 hours, inviting me to talk with them, letting me know the many ways that I could get connected with people at the UUCC. It was always something that I would do someday. And I never did. When my wife Jennefer and I moved back here in 2022, after spending 3 years in Arizona and Virginia, I knew it was time for me to join. It was time for me to show up and be part of a community. However, about after 2 or 3 services into our return, since I was attending regularly every week now, I realized that Jay was leaving. My first thought was, well, that means I can't join. I guess I'll keep shopping. After about 10 seconds, I realized, nope, you're gonna join, period. Whoever would be the next minister would be my minister. This is where I'm supposed to be, with you. Not behind you, not in front of you, not next to you, with you. The irony is that after almost 40 years of church floating, my first minister, the minister that I've shown up to be with, has been an interim minister. I've been blessed by my relationship with Reverend Lisa. I'm grateful for the work that she's done with us. And for the last 10 months, I've poured my time, energy, my mind, my heart into looking for our next settled minister. So when I stand here and I tell you almost tearfully that I'm grateful that we have found our minister, we found my minister in Reverend Amanda, you know that I'm very excited to show up to do the work with you and her. Thank you for your time this morning.
So it's lovely, and I'm a little touched. It was really, really wonderful. Does anybody have any questions? If you have questions and you're online, you can put them in the chat. Anyone in the room have a question for Dave?
So in the evolution of your belief system, from Catholic to evangelical, just curious at this point, how you view or reference the Bible.
The Bible, like a lot of other things, I think, could be the source of a lot of inspiration. I do think that the Bible was written by people, for people to tell stories. I think there's some really, really meaningful stories there. And stories not meaning fiction, stories meaning things that can fill our lives. I just think that for some folks, it's something else.
Yes.
Do you think that your quest for community, like you said, has anything to do with that, the kid not having roots established anywhere?
Definitely. Definitely. I learned, I ended up being more extroverted as the oldest of 3 kids and moving around a lot. I didn't have anyone to lean. I had to go out and make my own friends. I had to learn the new, well, I'll say vernacular now. I had to learn the slang. First day of school, the 3 of us would come back home and make jokes about what words were used there that weren't used where we used to live. And then within a few months, we're using all the same words. I do think that it was partly that, but I also think that at youth group as a teenager, it felt good being vulnerable together, learning together, trying our best to be the best versions of ourselves together. So I think it's a faith community is a certain kind of together, or it could be, you know, because a faith community is going to be whatever we each individually make it to be. So I wanted to have a certain kind of bond that I think lends itself to this kind of place. But yes, moving around was a big part of it.
I have a question. You talked about learning that you needed to not be a part-timer as far as faith was concerned. And so how does Unitarian Universalism play out in days other than Sunday for you? And big on the search team because that was almost every other day. But aside from that,
Well, and again, it's what we make it to be. One of the reasons that I'm on the intersectional justice team, in which I have not been able to be very active for the last few months because of the search team. Intersectional justice, it's about doing. And I've spent a lifetime of thinking, learning, strategizing, and not doing in some cases, especially when it comes to some of our societal transformation. And so one of the reasons I'm on that team is I want to make sure that at all times, no matter how many books I read, no matter podcasts, no matter how many group discussions I play a part, do something. Which was actually ironic what we just did upstairs, because we were talking about doing and thinking, and we need to do both. So with the thing with UU community is there's lots to do. And no one can do it all. So the idea is to pick your avenue and show up and do. And so for me, this year it's been about minister search team. In the process of figuring out what it'll be for next year. It will involve, some intersectional justice stuff, because I do need to be in the community and do something. So if that answers your question.
yes, I think we can call you a do you.
All right, so there's a multi-part question here. Do you have a favorite of 7 principles and why? And what is your hardest to practice?
I think that the interconnectedness is what brings me partially to UU. Okay. I think I am more universalist than I am Unitarian. And what also makes it that hard is to be, eventually it's got to involve everybody. And I don't mean and it's hard enough just everybody at the UUCC. It's everybody. And that's hard, loving everybody on some level is hard. And I don't mean barbecuing every day with everyone. That's light. That's hanging out with. But love is a motivating factor. It's hard being a universalist at times. But for me personally, once I start creating other, I've gone away from those 7 principles. I've gone away from UU. And so that's a challenge.
So those 2 questions came from Tom Bowers, and he had another question. Have you considered RE assistance?
If I consider getting assistance from Ari? I think, yes. Yeah, we just did a book discussion and I was one of the co-facilitators with that. I think that in various ways, RE is what there's also specialties within RE. There are folks that are really drawn towards young people. When I was younger, when I went to college, I actually thought I was going to be involved in some kind of youth ministry professionally. I actually have a special place in my heart as a UU for folks that on the other end of the spectrum from youth. The older we get, the harder it can be to rethink some stuff. And as the world is changing around us, it's hard. I'm not, in some circles, pardon me, the old person. I'm the oldest person in my company. Our company is only like 28 people in the corporate office, but I'm the oldest. I turn 61 next month. Here, I'm in the younger half. I am. But again, the longer we're used to something, the longer we do anything, the harder it is to rethink that. And so I am a bit drawn to that, whether that is two of us reading a book together and talking about, what do we think, or in a more structured environment. So.
Dave, I have to ask, where do you eat pizza in this town?
So there's,
Yeah.
I don't seek the best pizza anymore because I eat so I work for a pizza company
Oh,
and I used to own a pizza company.
yeah.
And so I kind of do what is convenient, but I actually like Marco's Pizza. I think it's solid, it's not the best, but but as a chain, it's pretty solid, so. But the best pizza is often in little tiny places that most people don't know, so.
So back to sort of the youth ministry, and obviously you've had teen angst growing up. Have you ever kind of wrapped around that and wanted to do like work with the teens here in the mentoring program or something, helping to mentor other young men so they don't go through something similar?
So, on one level, teen education is something that I'm not that qualified at this point. So at this point, it hasn't been at the forefront of my mind. In terms of young folks, I mean, one of the things I'm going to be doing over the next year, once I'm on the other side of the minister search team, I want to work with Erica's Closet. I want to work with helping folks that were formerly incarcerated get back into the workforce. I teach recruiting, I teach interviewing, and I want to help folks that really have a little bit of an uphill battle. At some point, the really hard part of that is I also feel that at some point to do some kind of work, getting businesses to rethink whether or not they're willing to hire someone who has a felony on their record. Because most of the franchisees I work with right now, they won't hire someone who's got a felony on their record. And that takes a lot of rethinking. And I want to start the work on how can we maybe, one, help folks who are interviewing and help teach them some skills and give them some pointers on the do the interview process. But it's also about how do you start getting it? And I think it's talking to businesses about hiring people with felonies on their record isn't a one conversation and don't check that box, they're gonna do it. It is conversations and planting seeds, and maybe at some point they will change what they're doing.
Well, isn't Moe's, or they all, I've heard Moe's restaurant chain hires a lot of incarcerated people.
They might,
Yeah.
they might.
I've heard that.
They're a little bit more on the progressive side.
All right, looks like we got time for one more.
Somebody else, I mean, I already asked, if somebody else. Go for it.
When I get to you.
Just real quick, I'm always curious, the environment you grew up as a family, you shared your spiritual journey. Does your siblings have any similar spiritual journeys?
Yes, it's difficult to try to decide which parts of their story to tell. My brother, so my sister's 1 year younger, and my brother's 3 years younger. My brother, went from a rather conservative culture growing up to a more liberal culture quicker than I did. And so, at some point, he's gonna see this. My sister, she has gradually also, culturally shifted. So the three of us kids no longer go to the Catholic Church. My parents still do. But each of us has kind of done our own path.
Well, thank you so much for your time and everything that you've talked about. It's been a